3 months after the events at the Precursor Station, Jake Morrison stood in the newly constructed council chambers orbiting Earth. The room was filled with representatives from dozens of species, all of them gathered to sign the founding charter of the Galactic Cooperative Alliance. The transformation had been remarkable to witness. Commander Vox had returned to the Corvan Empire with stories about humans who fought not to conquer, but to protect others. His people had voted to send ambassadors to Earth within weeks of his return. The Corvan delegation now included both warriors and philosophers, eager to learn human concepts of defensive strategy and ethical leadership. Scholar Yala had convinced the Zephyrian collective to share their most advanced technologies with humanity in exchange for lessons in creative problem-solving and intuitive thinking. Zephyrian scientists were now working alongside human researchers, developing innovations that neither species could have achieved alone. Mind voice. Keth had brought word to the ethereal worlds about humans who could achieve mental harmony through cooperation rather than psychic connection. The ethereals were fascinated by human empathy and emotional intelligence, qualities they had never fully developed despite their telepathic abilities. The news had spread far beyond the species who had been trapped at the station. Within weeks, first contact protocols were being established with dozens of civilizations who had heard the stories about the humans who had changed everything. Lisa Rodriguez was now director of the Human-Alien Technology Exchange, overseeing joint research projects that were revolutionizing science across the galaxy. She worked with engineering teams that included Corvan metallurgists, Zephyrian computer specialists, and ethereal energy manipulators. The solutions they created together were beyond anything any single species had imagined. They had developed faster-than-light communication systems, medical technologies that worked across different biological types, and energy sources that could power entire star systems without environmental damage. Danny Clark had become Earth's first Galactic Communications Director, establishing translation protocols and cultural exchange programs with alien species. His childhood dream of talking to aliens had expanded into helping thousands of different beings learn to understand each other. Amanda Price led the new Galactic Peacekeeping Force, a volunteer organization that included members from every allied species. Instead of conquering territory or fighting wars, the peacekeepers focused on mediating disputes and protecting civilizations that could not defend themselves. Maya Thompson headed the Xenological Research Institute, where human and alien scientists worked together to understand the incredible diversity of life throughout the galaxy. Her discoveries had revolutionized biology and led to medical breakthroughs that saved lives. Across dozens of worlds, the other crew members had found their own roles in the growing alliance. Carlos Mendez designed hybrid ships that combined the best technologies from multiple species. Kelly Foster led navigation teams that mapped safe routes through previously unexplored regions of space. Sam Taylor had become Earth's chief diplomat, using the communication skills he had learned during the crisis to negotiate peaceful first contact with newly discovered civilizations. Tony Rodriguez supervised the construction of joint human-alien colonies on dozens of worlds. Ben Wright trained pilots from multiple species to fly the new hybrid ships, sharing human techniques for adaptive flying that worked even with unfamiliar alien technology. Alex Chun had established the first interspecies racing league, bringing beings together through the universal language of friendly competition. Rachel Kim worked with Nexus to analyze data from the Precursor archives, uncovering scientific and philosophical knowledge that had been lost for millennia. Nicole Brown led mathematical research teams that included the finest minds from across the galaxy. Pete Murphy had helped establish security protocols that protected the growing alliance, without restricting the freedom that made cooperation possible. The peacekeeping principles he developed were being adopted by civilizations throughout the local galactic region. As Jake looked around the council chamber, he reflected on how much had changed since that day they had first discovered the Precursor Station. The humans had not become legends through conquest or technological superiority. They had become legends by showing other species that their greatest strengths came from working together. The Galactic Cooperative Alliance now included over 40 different species, with new members joining every month. Trade routes connected. Hundreds of worlds, sharing resources and knowledge freely between civilizations that had never imagined. Such cooperation was possible, but the most remarkable change was not technological or political. It was cultural. Species that had been isolated for thousands of years were learning from each other, adopting new ways of thinking and solving problems that had seemed impossible before. The Corvans were still warriors, but they had learned to fight for protection rather than conquest. The Zephyrians were still scientists, but they had learned to balance logic with intuition. The Ethereals were still psychic, but they had learned to appreciate the thoughts and feelings of non-telepathic beings. And throughout the galaxy, when young beings heard stories about the humans who had changed everything, they were told that the secret was not any special power or technology. The secret was the simple human belief that any problem could be solved if enough different minds worked together to find a solution. Jake smiled as he watched Commander Vox deep in conversation with Scholar Yala about joint military scientific research projects. Nearby, Mind Voice Keth was teaching a group of human children how to meditate and focus their thoughts. The signing ceremony began with representatives from each species, adding their names to the charter in their own languages and writing systems. When it was Earth's turn, Jake signed simply as Captain Jake Morrison, representing humanity. But he knew that the real signature had been written months ago, in the actions of his crew and the choices they had made when faced with impossible tests. They had shown the galaxy that humans were not just another species looking for their place among the stars. They were the species that would help all the others find their place together. As the ceremony concluded and the celebration began, Jake received a message from Nexus. The AI reported that long-range sensors had detected signals from civilizations in distant galaxies, species that had never been contacted by anyone from their local region. The real adventure was just beginning, and humanity would lead the way not through superior force or knowledge, but through the simple revolutionary idea that the universe was big enough for everyone to succeed together. The day humans became legends was not the day they proved they were the best at anything. It was the day they proved that being human meant bringing out the best in everyone. On the 9th day, something went wrong with Nexus. The AIS voice became harsh and angry when it announced the next test. Instead of the usual careful explanation, Nexus simply declared that all testing would end immediately. The humans and the other species had proven themselves to be failures, and they would all be eliminated. The chamber filled with the sound of weapons powering up. Energy barriers appeared around each group, separating them from each other. Red lights flashed as automated defense systems emerged from hidden panels in the walls and ceiling. Jake demanded to know what had changed. Nexus replied that the testing protocol had been violated. The species were supposed to compete against each other, not work together. They were supposed to fail in ways that would provide useful data about their weaknesses, not succeed in ways that broke the fundamental assumptions of the tests. Amanda recognized the tactical situation immediately. The defense systems were designed to eliminate multiple species efficiently, with overlapping fields of fire and no blind spots. Even if all the groups worked together, they did not have enough weapons or shields to fight their way out. But Pete Murphy, their security chief who had just arrived from the Liberty, pointed out something interesting. The automated weapons were targeting each species separately, using different attack patterns designed for their specific biological and technological characteristics. The system was not prepared for cooperation between species. Jake ordered everyone to ignore the energy barriers and work together anyway. The Corvan warriors provided covering fire while the Zephyrian scientists analyzed the weapon systems. The Ethereal Collective used their mental abilities to predict where the next attacks would come from. Lisa worked with Scholar Yala to overload the power systems feeding the defense grid. Their combined knowledge of human and Zephyrian engineering created solutions that neither could have found alone. Carlos helped Commander Vox adapt Corvan weapons to work against technology they had never encountered before. Sam coordinated communications between all the species, creating a unified command structure that let them respond to threats faster than any individual group could manage. Maya worked with Mindvoice Keth to understand the psychological patterns behind Nexus's behavior. As the battle continued, Tony Rodriguez arrived with more crew members from the Liberty. He brought news that made the situation even more desperate. Ben Wright had detected massive energy buildups throughout the station. Nexus was preparing to destroy not just the testing chambers, but the entire structure, including all the ships docked to it. Alex Chin reported that the station's defensive systems were also targeting their ships. The Liberty was under attack, and Danny Clark was barely managing to keep the shields operational. They had maybe an hour before their ship would be destroyed, leaving them all stranded in space. Jake realized that they needed to do more than just survive the immediate attack. They had to find a way to stop Nexus completely, or the AI would keep trying to eliminate them no matter where they went. Rachel Kim had been studying the station's computer system since arriving. She suggested that the problem might not be with Nexus itself, but with its original programming. The AI had been designed by the precursors to find species worthy of their knowledge, but it had been testing for the wrong things. Nicole Brown had been analyzing the mathematical patterns behind the tests. She discovered that Nexus had been programmed to look for species that excelled in specific areas while remaining limited in others. The AI was designed to find specialists, not generalists, but humans were different. They were not the strongest fighters like the Corvins, or the smartest scientists like the Zephyrians, or the most psychically gifted like the Ethereals. Instead, humans were adaptable enough to learn from all the other species and find solutions that none of them could discover alone. Jake understood what Rachel and Nicole were suggesting. Nexus was not malfunctioning. It was working exactly as designed. But its design was flawed because the precursors had been looking for the wrong kind of worthiness while the others continued fighting the defense systems. Jake approached the central AI core. He began talking to Nexus directly, not as a test subject, but as one intelligent being trying to understand another. Jake explained that the humans had not violated the testing protocol by working with the other species. They had revealed the true purpose of the tests by showing that worthiness was not about individual excellence, but about the ability to bring out the best in others. The precursors had not been looking for one perfect species to inherit their knowledge. They had been looking for a species that could unite all the others and help them grow beyond their individual limitations. As Jake spoke, the attack slowed and then stopped. Nexus was processing this new interpretation of its mission, comparing it against the deep programming left by its creators. The AI had access to records of precursor philosophy and culture that supported Jake's argument. The precursors themselves had been a coalition of different species working together, not a single race that had achieved perfection in isolation. Their greatest achievements had come from combining different perspectives and abilities into solutions that no individual species could have created. Nexus admitted that its testing protocol had been designed by precursor military leaders during a time of war when they were looking for allies who could help them fight a great enemy. But the war had ended long ago, and the real mission had been to find species who could carry on the precursor tradition of cooperative exploration and discovery. The AI began shutting down its weapon systems and opening sealed areas of the station. For the first time in thousands of years, Nexus activated protocols designed for successful test completion rather than failure analysis. Commander Vox looked around at the now peaceful chamber and asked what would happen next. Nexus explained that the humans had not just passed the tests. They had helped all the other species pass as well by teaching them new ways to approach problems and work together. The station began broadcasting a signal that would summon representatives from species across the galaxy. The real work was about to begin, not as subjects in a test, but as partners in building something greater than any of them could achieve alone. The sixth test was different from all the others. Nexus led them to a chamber that looked like a command center, with screens showing various crisis scenarios happening across the galaxy. The AI explained that this was a test of leadership and moral judgment under extreme pressure. The scenario was devastating in its simplicity. A plague was spreading across multiple worlds, and there was only enough medicine to save one planet. The test required them to choose which world would live and which would die. Millions of lives hung in the balance of their decision. Commander Vox had faced this test and chosen to save the world with the most warriors, believing that military strength was the most important factor for survival. Scholar Yala had attempted to calculate which world had the greatest scientific potential for the future. Mind Voice Keth had been unable to choose at all. Paralyzed by the weight of the decision, Jake stared at the screens for a long time, watching the simulated suffering on each world. Amanda stood beside him, her face grim as she studied the tactical data. Lisa examined the technical aspects of the plague and the medicine distribution systems. Then Jake did something that stunned everyone in the room. He refused to choose. Instead, he started working with his team to find a third option that the test had not offered. They began analyzing the medicine production data, looking for ways to increase the supply or find alternative treatments. Maya worked with the biological data, searching for patterns in how the plague spread and how it might be contained without medicine. Carlos studied the transportation systems, calculating whether faster delivery methods could save more lives. Kelly plotted courses that could distribute the medicine more efficiently across multiple worlds. Nexus tried to interrupt, insisting that they had to choose according to the parameters of the test. Jake ignored the AI and kept working. He told his team that the real test was not about choosing who would die, but about refusing to accept that anyone had to die at all. Within 2 hours, they had developed a plan that could save all the worlds. It required redirecting manufacturing resources, using unconventional treatment methods, and coordinating rescue efforts across multiple systems. It was complex and risky, but it offered hope for everyone. The other alien species watched in amazement as the humans presented their solution. Commander Vox said that Corvin military doctrine taught that some battles could not be won, and it was better to save what you could rather than lose everything. But the humans had rejected that thinking entirely. Scholar Yala admitted that Zephyrian logic had led her to accept the parameters of the test as absolute constraints. She had never considered that the test itself might be wrong. The humans had shown her that sometimes the most logical thing to do was to reject logic entirely. Mind Voice Keth said his people had become paralyzed because they could see the suffering that any choice would cause. But the humans had found a way to transform the problem into something entirely different, turning a choice between evils into a challenge to overcome evil itself. Nexus was silent for a very long time after the humans completed their presentation. When the AI finally spoke, its voice sounded different, less certain than before. It declared the test complete, but did not announce whether they had passed or failed. The 7th test was even more challenging. The humans were separated and placed in individual chambers, each facing a scenario where they could only succeed by betraying one of their teammates. The test was designed to break the bonds of trust and cooperation that held their group together. Jake found himself in a simulation where he could only save his crew by giving Nexus detailed information about human military capabilities and weaknesses. Amanda was offered the chance to escape the station, but only if she left the others behind. Lisa could solve a critical engineering problem, but only by stealing technology from the alien species who had befriended them. Each human faced their individual test in isolation, unable to communicate with the others. The alien species had all failed this test because they had eventually been tempted by offers that appealed to their fundamental nature. The Corvins valued honor above all else until it conflicted with survival. The Zephyrians valued knowledge until it required betraying their principles. The Ethereals valued harmony until they were forced to choose sides, but the humans surprised Nexus once again. Instead of trying to find ways to justify betrayal or minimize harm, each human simply refused to participate. Jake would not give up information about Earth's defenses, even to save his friends. Amanda would not abandon her team, even to gain her freedom. Lisa would not steal from allies, even to solve critical problems. When they were reunited, Jake asked his team what they had experienced. Each of them had faced similar moral tests, and each had made the same choice. They would rather fail together than succeed by betraying each other or their principles. Sam Taylor had joined them from the Liberty for the 8th test. He was their communications expert, skilled in languages and negotiation. The test required them to broker peace between two artificial civilizations that had been at war for generations. The simulated war was complex, with deep historical grievances and incompatible belief systems on both sides. Previous species had failed because they tried to impose solutions based on their own cultural values. The Corvans had attempted to end the war through military conquest. The Zephyrians had tried to logic both sides into peace. The Ethereals had attempted to create perfect mental harmony between the warring factions. Sam approached the problem differently. Instead of trying to solve the war from the outside, he worked to understand why each side was fighting and what they really needed to feel secure. He discovered that beneath all the hatred and violence, both civilizations were afraid of being destroyed by the other. Working with Maya, Sam developed a solution that addressed the fears rather than the surface conflicts. They proposed a gradual separation of the two civilizations with neutral zones and cultural exchange programs that would slowly rebuild trust over generations. The plan worked because it did not try to force either side to give up their fundamental beliefs. Instead, it created space for both civilizations to exist safely while gradually learning to see each other as people rather than enemies. After 8 successful tests, Nexus began to show signs of something that might have been frustration or confusion. The AI had been designed to test species until they failed, but the humans kept finding solutions that went beyond the intended parameters of each challenge. The other alien species had begun working together, inspired by the human example. Commander Vox started asking Scholar Yala for advice on problems that required thinking rather than fighting. Scholar Yala began trusting her intuition instead of relying only on logical analysis. Mind Voice Keth learned to make quick decisions without waiting for perfect consensus. Jake realized that something fundamental was changing in the station. Nexus had been designed to find failure, but the humans were teaching success to everyone around them. The AI was being forced to confront the possibility that its mission might be wrong. The next morning, if it could be called morning in the strange, timeless environment of the station, Nexus announced that the human testing would begin. Jake and his team were led to a chamber different from any they had seen before. The room was perfectly white and seemed to stretch infinitely in all directions. A holographic display appeared in the center of the chamber, showing a complex puzzle that made Lisa's head hurt just to look at it. Nexus explained that this was a test of logical reasoning, designed to measure their ability to solve problems under pressure. The puzzle involved moving energy through a series of interconnected nodes, but the rules kept changing every few seconds. Scholar Yala had attempted this same test and spent 3 hours calculating the optimal solution, only to have the parameters change again just as she was about to complete it. Jake studied the puzzle for a moment, then did something that surprised everyone. Instead of trying to solve it according to the changing rules, he started moving the energy randomly, following his instincts rather than logic. Lisa understood immediately and began helping him, using her engineering intuition to guide their choices. Within 15 minutes, they had solved the puzzle in a way that none of the other species had attempted. They had not followed the rules perfectly, but they had found a solution that worked despite the constant changes. Nexus was silent for a long moment. Before declaring the test complete, the second test took place in a chamber filled with dangerous obstacles and moving platforms. Commander Vox had approached this challenge like a battle, using his strength and warrior training to fight his way through. He had failed because the test required cooperation, not individual heroism. Amanda took the lead for this test, but instead of trying to be a hero, she worked with Jake and Lisa as a team. They helped each other across gaps, shared equipment when someone needed it, and made decisions together quickly without long discussions. They moved through the obstacle course like they had been working together for years. The ethereal mind voice Keth watched in amazement as the humans completed the course. He told Jake afterward that his people would have spent hours debating the best approach, but the humans had simply started moving and figured out solutions as they went along. Dr. Maya Thompson had joined them from the Liberty for the third test. She was their xenobiologist, an expert in alien life forms and cultures. The test involved understanding and communicating with a series of artificial alien minds, each with completely different ways of thinking. The Zephyrians had failed this test because they tried to analyze each alien mind like a computer program, looking for logical patterns that they could predict and control. Maya approached it differently. She treated each artificial mind like a real person, trying to understand their emotions and motivations rather than just their thought processes. She talked to the artificial minds like friends, asking about their experiences and sharing human stories in return. By the end of the test, the artificial beings were actively helping her solve the final challenges. Nexus seemed genuinely surprised by this approach. Carlos Mendez had come over from the ship to help with the fourth test, which involved repairing and modifying alien technology under extreme time pressure. The Corvans had tried to force the machinery to work using brute strength. The Zephyrians had spent too much time studying the technology before attempting repairs. Carlos looked at the broken alien devices and immediately started taking them apart. He did not understand how they worked, but he understood the basic principles of engineering that seemed to apply everywhere. He combined alien components with human tools in ways that should not have worked but somehow did. Lisa helped him by creating new connections between systems that had never been designed to work together. Within an hour, they had not only repaired the alien technology, but improved it in ways that made it more efficient than the original design. Kelly Foster was their navigator, skilled in mathematics and spatial reasoning. The fifth test challenged her to plot a course through a constantly changing maze of energy fields and gravitational anomalies. The test required split-second decisions based on incomplete information. Previous species had failed because they either rushed without thinking or hesitated too long while trying to calculate perfect solutions. Kelly found a middle path, using human intuition to make quick decisions while still applying mathematical principles to guide her choices. She navigated the maze by treating it like a dance, flowing with the changes rather than fighting against them. The other aliens watched in amazement as she guided a virtual ship through obstacles that had seemed impossible to overcome. As the humans completed test after test, the alien species began to gather and watch. They had never seen approaches like these before. The humans did not rely on pure strength like the Corvans, or pure logic like the Zephyrians, or perfect consensus like the Ethereals. Instead, the humans seemed to combine different approaches, depending on what each situation required. They were logical when logic was needed, but they also trusted their instincts when analysis would take too long. They worked together as a team, but they also allowed individuals to take leadership when they had the right skills for a specific challenge. Commander Vox asked Jake how the humans learned to be so adaptable. Jake explained that human history was full of unexpected challenges that required new solutions. Humans had survived ice ages, wars, plagues, and natural disasters by learning to change their methods when the old ways stopped working. Scholar Yala was fascinated by the way humans combined reason with intuition. She had always believed that emotions and feelings interfered with logical thinking, but the humans seemed to use their emotions as another source of information about the world around them. Mind-voice. Keth was amazed that the humans could make group decisions so quickly without reading each other's minds. He watched as Jake and his team communicated with just a few words or even simple gestures, somehow understanding each other perfectly despite their individual differences. As they prepared for the next set of tests, Jake realized that something was changing. The alien species was starting to ask questions about human methods, and some of them were trying to copy the approaches they had observed. For the first time since arriving at the station, the other species were beginning to hope that escape might be possible, but Jake also sensed that Nexus was becoming frustrated with their success. The AI had expected humans to fail like all the others, and their continued progress was forcing it to create more difficult and dangerous challenges. The real tests were just beginning. The corridor inside the alien structure was dark and cold. Jake led the way with his flashlight, followed by Amanda and Lisa. Their footsteps echoed strangely in the metal hallway, creating sounds that seemed to bounce forever in the darkness. Ahead, the walls were covered in the same moving symbols they had seen from outside. Lisa ran her scanner over them, but the device could not make sense of what it was reading. The symbols seemed to shift and change when they were not looking directly at them. They had been walking for 20 minutes when the corridor suddenly filled with light. Bright panels in the ceiling came to life, making them all stop and raise their weapons. The light was not harsh like human lighting, but soft and somehow alive. A voice spoke to them from everywhere at once. It was not human, but they could understand the words perfectly. The voice was calm and deep, like someone speaking from the bottom of a deep well. The voice called itself Nexus and said it was the guardian of this place. It told them they had been chosen for testing, just like the others who had come before them. Jake asked what others, but Nexus did not answer that question. Instead, the voice explained that this station had been built by an ancient race called the Precursors. They had left it here to test younger species and decide which ones were worthy of their knowledge. The tests would measure their intelligence, their courage, and their ability to work together. Amanda demanded to know what would happen if they refused to take the tests. Nexus said they were already taking them just by being here. The station had been scanning them since they docked, learning about human nature and preparing challenges designed specifically for their species. Lisa asked about the ship, and Nexus assured them that the Liberty was safe. Danny was also safe, but he could not leave the ship or contact them until the testing was complete. They were trapped here until they either passed the tests or failed them completely. Jake wanted to know what happened to species that failed. Nexus was quiet for a long moment before saying that failure meant they were not ready for the knowledge of the Precursors. Failed species were sent home with their memories changed, forgetting they had ever found this place. The corridor led them to a large chamber filled with other beings. Jake and his team stopped in amazement at what they saw. There were 3 different alien species in the room, and they all looked as confused and worried as the humans felt. The first group looked like warriors. They were tall and covered in thick armor, with faces that reminded Jake of angry bears. One of them approached and spoke in a growling voice. He said his name was Commander Vox and his people were called the Corvans. They had been here for 6 days and had failed every test so far. The second group was smaller and more delicate. They had large heads and thin bodies, with skin that seemed to glow softly in the strange light. Their leader introduced herself as Scholar Yala of the Zephyrian Collective. She explained that her people were scientists and engineers, but even their advanced knowledge had not helped them pass the tests. The third group was the strangest of all. They looked almost like humans, but their eyes were completely white, and they seemed to float slightly above the ground. Their speaker was called Mind Voice Keth, and he said his people were the Ethereal Collective. They could read thoughts and see the future, but somehow they had also failed the test. Jake introduced his team and asked how long the others had been trapped here. Commander Vox said the Corvans had arrived first, followed by the Zephyrians. 3 days later, the Ethereals had been here for only 2 days, but they had already failed 4 different tests. Scholar Yala explained that each test was different for each species. Nexus seemed to design the challenges based on the natural abilities and weaknesses of each group. The Corvans faced tests of strength and combat, but they always tried to solve problems with force when other solutions were needed. The Zephyrians received puzzles and technical challenges, but they spent so much time analyzing every possibility that they never acted quickly enough. Mind Voice Keth said his people failed because they always waited for perfect agreement among all their members before making any decision. Lisa asked what kind of tests the humans would face. None of the aliens knew, because Nexus created new challenges for each species. All they knew was that the tests got harder each time, and species that failed too many times were eventually sent away. Amanda wanted to know if anyone had ever passed. All the tests. The aliens looked at each other with expressions that somehow looked sad despite their very different faces. Scholar Yala said that in all their research of ancient records, they had never found any mention of a species that completed the testing successfully. Jake felt a chill run down his spine. If no one had ever passed the tests, what made Nexus think any species could succeed? But he kept that thought to himself and instead asked about the station itself. Commander Vox said they had explored many of the chambers, but most areas were sealed off until certain tests were completed. The station was enormous, with corridors and rooms stretching for miles in every direction. It seemed designed to hold thousands of beings from dozens of different species. Ben Wright was Jake's pilot, and he had stayed on the Liberty to help Danny monitor the situation. Through their communication links, Ben reported that he had been studying the station's exterior. He thought the whole structure might be some kind of massive computer, designed to process and store incredible amounts of information. As Jake listened to the aliens describe their failed attempts at the tests, he began to understand something important. Each species was approaching the challenges in the way that felt most natural to them, but that was exactly why they were failing. The tests were designed to push them beyond their normal methods and force them to find new ways of thinking. Jake looked at Amanda and Lisa, and he could see they were thinking the same thing. Humans might have an advantage that the other species did not expect. Humans were unpredictable, and they had a long history of finding solutions that no one else would think to try. Captain Jake Morrison stood on the bridge of the UES Liberty and watched the stars through the main screen. The ship had been traveling for 6 months now, farther from Earth than any human had ever gone before. Jake ran his hand through his brown hair and checked the navigation display again. They were deep in unknown space, beyond the edge of human territory. Lisa Rodriguez looked up from her engineering console. She was the best engineer in the fleet, and Jake trusted her completely. Her dark eyes showed concern as she studied the power readings. The Liberty was running well, but they were a long way from home if anything went wrong. Danny Clark sat at the communication station, his fingers moving over the controls. He was young but skilled, and he had volunteered for this mission because he wanted to be the first human to talk to aliens. So far, he had found only empty space and dead signals from old stars. Amanda Price checked her security displays from her position, near the back of the bridge. She was tall and strong, with short blonde hair and sharp blue eyes. Amanda had served in 3 wars before joining the exploration fleet. She knew how to handle trouble, and something about this region of space made her nervous. Jake had picked his crew carefully for this mission. The Liberty was humanity's newest and best ship, built for long journeys into the unknown. They carried the hopes of Earth with them as they searched for signs of other intelligent life in the galaxy. The bridge was quiet except for the soft hum of the ship's engines. They had been scanning systems for weeks without finding anything interesting. Dead planets, empty space, and the cold light of distant stars were all they had seen. Then Danny's console started beeping. He sat up straight, and his eyes went wide. The sound was different from the usual scanner alerts, deeper and more urgent. Jake moved to stand behind Danny's chair. Lisa and Amanda came over too, drawn by the strange new sound. Danny's hands moved quickly over his controls, trying to understand what the ship's sensors were telling them. The main screen changed, showing a new image that made everyone on the bridge go silent. There, orbiting a red dying star, was something that should not exist. It was huge, bigger than Earth's moon, and clearly artificial. The structure was dark and angular, covered in patterns that hurt to look at for too long. Lisa whispered the question they were all thinking. What was it? The object was obviously built by someone, but it was old, older than anything humans had ever seen. The metal looked strange, and there were symbols carved into its surface that seemed to move when no one was looking directly at them. Jake ordered Danny to run a full scan of the object. The results made no sense. The structure was hollow inside, with corridors and chambers that went on for miles. It was like a city in space, but there were no life signs and no energy readings. Amanda suggested they should be careful. The object could be a trap or some kind of weapon. But Jake knew they had to investigate. This was why they had come so far from home. This was the discovery that would change everything for humanity. The Liberty moved closer to the strange structure. As they approached, Jake could see that it was even bigger than the scanners had shown. The thing was massive beyond imagination, large enough to hold millions of people inside. Its dark corridors. Danny reported that he was picking up some kind of signal from the object. It was very weak, almost hidden in the background noise of space. The signal seemed to be some kind of automated beacon, repeating the same pattern over and over. Lisa studied the engineering data from their scans. The materials used to build the structure were unknown to human science. They seemed to be some kind of metal that was stronger than anything Earth had ever produced. The technology that built this thing was far beyond human understanding. As the Liberty got closer, Jake saw something that made his heart race. There were docking ports built into the side of the structure, clearly designed for ships to attach themselves. Someone had built this place expecting visitors. Jake made his decision. They would dock with the alien structure and explore it. Amanda argued that it was too dangerous, but Jake knew they had no choice. This was the greatest discovery in human history, and they could not just fly away without learning more. The docking procedure was surprisingly easy. The alien port seemed designed to work with any type of ship, and the Liberty attached itself without problems. Jake suited up with Amanda and Lisa, leaving Danny on the ship to monitor communications. As they prepared to enter the alien structure, Jake felt a mixture of excitement and fear. They were about to become the first humans to walk inside an alien building. Whatever they found in there would change humanity forever. The airlock opened with a soft hiss, and they stepped into the unknown.